Hello, everybody. Jade Hamilton here. After months and months and months of hiatus, I'm here to do whatever I want Monday, which is our wonderful tag with Dee at the Baby Patch. I'm also here to do my lovely friend Jay's tag, um, which is new doll clothes. And I'm also here to read you a story. But before I do all of that, I'm going to introduce you to this little girl. Her name is Liberty Rain. She's a phoenix Build-A-Bear. She's got the most beautiful, stunning green eyes and this wonderful two-tone red and orange fur. She's wearing a little bib that's sort of jade green that says Little Foodie in pink and black letters, which is very appropriate considering we love the food in our house. And she's got this gorgeous, I'm not sure it's a onesie or a romper. I think it's too thick to be a onesie, so I'm calling it a romper. It's cream. It's this wonderful sort of delicate cream colour, and it's got sort of burnished gold polka dots all over it, and burnished gold trim around the bottom, and it says hello in lowercase italic black writing. I think is it appliqued? No, it's just, I think it's just printed on. It doesn't feel like it's appliqued. And she's also got this gorgeous matching burnished gold and cream turban with a little bow on the front. She looked absolutely stunning in it. Liberty she's a phoenix bear. She was posted on Vinted, still with her tags on, for £16. Yeah, £16. And luckily, the seller and I managed to negotiate that down to a tenner. She is utterly stunning, and she's so incredibly soft. I don't think she knows what to make of us quite yet, because she only arrived last night, but she is an absolute darling, and I'm so pleased to have her. If you haven't checked Dee or Jay out already, please do. They are wonderful, wonderful ladies with lots of gorgeous babies. Jay has some amazing tasting clothes, and sometimes I watch her videos just to see what lovely outfits she's got. And both Jay and Dee have been incredibly supportive of this channel all through. Oh, and while I remember, Jay also has a journaling channel called Jay's Journaling, which, if you love journaling and making things and all that sort of thing, do check that out too. Well, anyway, on to our story now, and this time we are looking at I think this book is a classic. I think it's a really good book, but not many people, even here in the UK, have heard of it really. They've heard of the author. It's by Nina Borden, but more so for a couple of other children's books that she wrote. She wrote a book about evacuees called Carrie's War, which is very, very rightly regarded as a classic and has been on the school syllabus more than once. I may tackle that one on this channel if you guys would like me to. I know you appreciate it when I read, so if you would like me to do Carrie's War, I'm more than happy to do so. I may have to brush up on my Welsh accents a little bit though, because my Welsh accents are not the best. And I also apologise because the granny in this story has an Eastern European accent, and my Eastern European accents are also not the best, but I am going to try my best. We're reading Granny the Pag by Nina Borden, which I've loved since I was a child. It's a very moving book. It's very funny. The characters in it are really great and memorable. So I thought we would tackle that one today, because I know a lot of you guys, bless you, have been saying to me that you miss seeing the cubs and you miss hearing me read stories. So, and I've missed doing it. I've just been having a lot of other things that have taken my attention. I've had some health stuff that I've had to deal with. I had a sore on my leg that just would not heal, unfortunately. But now I'm fighting fit. My leg is near enough healed, and my script that I was working on as well, although that isn't completely finished, it is nearly there. So I wanted to come back and see you guys again and show off, or well, not show off, that's probably the wrong word, but introduce you to all my little ones again and enjoy reading stories with you guys. So, as per all the videos where I read, all copyright goes to the Nina Borden estate and to Puffin. I own absolutely nothing. Make yourself comfortable. Grab yourself a drink if you've got one. Grab yourself a fan if you're hot, or an extra blanket if you're chilly. Make yourself really comfortable, and we'll get started. Chapter 1. Other people's grandmothers are soft and powdery and gentle and kind, like Tom and Rose's grandmother. But my granny is a pag. And pag is with a capital P, by the way. Rosie is my best friend, and Tom is her brother. Their grandmother lives in a house not far from our school, and we usually stop there on our way to the station before we catch the train home. There's always a vase of flowers in the exact middle of their grandmother's window, and when she opens the door she always says, "Oh, what a lovely surprise!" As if this is the first time she's seen us for about 900 years. Perhaps it isn't silly of her to pretend she wasn't expecting us when she has a tray with 3 mugs and a plate of biscuits ready and waiting, but it feels nice all the same. Granny the Pag never comes to the door. I have my own house key, and as I come in, she just shouts wherever she is, "Who goes there?" And when I answer, she says, "Pass, friend." If Rosie and Tom are with me and I ask if we can have a Coke, instead of saying, as their grandmother would, "Darling, don't you think milk would be nicer? Or fresh lemonade?" the pag says, "Go ahead, rot your teeth, see if I care." Tom and Rosie live next door and are used to her because they're my friends. I don't think they would say anything behind my back, but I wouldn't want anyone else to come home with me. The house isn't dirty because we have someone to clean it, a different person about every month or so. No one can stand her much longer, but there are a lot of cats. 9 last time I counted, and 4 dogs, all rather old. And worst of all, the pag smokes and everything smells of it. Curtains, carpets, dogs and cats, as well as my hair. It's a dirty and disgusting habit, I tell her. Look at you, ash all down your front and a yellow moustache and brown teeth. And what's more, you'll die of it if you're not careful. Green slime will fill up your lungs and you'll die. Sometimes, if it's a cold day, she opens a window then and makes me sit right beside it. But mostly she just laughs until she starts coughing. I'm not aiming to live to 100. You wouldn't want me to either. You might have to look after me, and that would be a penance for both of us. At least she doesn't smoke when she comes to school, to the prize giving or the Christmas play. I tell her she needn't come if she really can't bear it, but she's decided it's her duty to stand in for my parents on every occasion of that sort. And so she just sits there, usually in the very front row, looking grim. Weird, too. Rose's grandmother wears pretty, soft clothes, woolly and silky and pale colours. She keeps her glasses on a gold chain round her neck. There are tiny gold studs in her ears, and she always smells nice, like violet soap. But when she isn't dressed in her jeans or her motorbike leathers, Granny the pag wears dusty black skirts that trail on the ground, and she has a horrible fur jacket that she brings out for special occasions. I tell her it's wrong to hurt animals just to keep warm or look smart. But she says, whatever old wolf this pelt belonged to ended its life so long ago, I don't think you need trouble to mourn it. But if it really upsets you, I'll wear the black wool and the brooch. Which puts me on the spot. The black wool is one thing. You can't see where the moths have been unless you look closely. But the brooch is a different kind of embarrassment altogether. Proper grandmothers have proper jewellery, pearls and delicate rings, the sort of things that they can leave to their granddaughters. The brooch is enormous, about the size of my clenched fist, a huge chunk of gold covered in birds and feathers and flowers made out of diamonds. It belonged to the pag's grandmother who lived in Russia hundreds of years ago and must have been very rich, unless that kind of thing was much cheaper then. The pag wears it to hide stains on her sweaters or hold her clothes together when a button's lost or a zip broken. She says it has a good strong pin. My mother says to her, "My precious darling, you really must not wear that great vulgar gewgaw all the time. You'll get mugged, my angel." My mother calls everyone darling or precious, usually because she's forgotten their names, though she must remember her mother's. But the pag just shrugs and says, "I doubt anyone would think it was real. Not if they took a good look at the rest of me." When I was 5 or 6, I used to boast at school that my grandmother's father came from Russia, and that this big brooch was given to them by the Tsar. Now I'm older, 13 next birthday. It seems dreadful to wear something so valuable when people are starving in Africa and sleeping on the streets in New York and London. We did a project on poverty in the third world last term, and because I finished before anyone else, I did an extra essay on poverty in the rest. And of course, some people might say that if the pag sold the brooch, she could afford to buy herself some decent clothes instead of going around looking like a bag lady or a Raggedy Ann. I expect that's what the girls in my class say behind my back, along with a lot of other things about my mother and father. How Ty has had false hair woven over the bald patch on top of his head, and how she has had or needs a new facelift. Before I start the story, I'd better explain who I am. My name is Catriona Natasha Brooke. The Natasha comes from my mother, and the Brooke from my father, and that's Brooke with an E. I suppose I'm lucky it was that way round. The pag's family name, which was my mother's before she married my father, is very long and almost unpronounceable. Catriona is a Scottish name because my parents were on tour in Scotland when I was born. The pag says my mother gave birth to me in the 20-minute interval in the middle of the play, in the leading lady's dressing room. My mother wasn't the leading lady. She was only playing the maid, but it was an emergency. Some of the teachers at school call me Catriona. Most other people call me Cat, except the pag sometimes, when she's being very serious, or my mother, if she speaks to me on the telephone. When she's run out of names, like sweetheart and dearest and jewel, she calls me Natasha, rolling her R's as if she has something tickling her tongue. I don't know what my parents called me when I was very young. I don't know what my parents called me when I was very young. I do know there was a stage before we got to the darlings and angels when I was known as the kid. Capital T, capital K. Where's the kid? Anyone seen the kid? Usually with a rude adjective in front of kid. That was before the pag took me over. Sorry, my teeth aren't in place today. That was before the Pag took me over, when I was still being trailed around with my mother and father and the rest of the theatre company, sleeping in the hamper that belonged to the wardrobe mistress, and being wrapped up in a shawl and carried on stage whenever the play called for a baby. I suppose I got too big to be useful in that way. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in a big old armchair picking at the stuffing that was oozing out of the holes in the seat, and the Pag and I were glaring at each other, eyeball to eyeball. I had never seen anyone who looked so tall and so thin. She had a big sharp nose and big sharp eyes that were a very light, piercing ice blue, and her fingers were like scarecrows, long and twiggy. I must have seen a scarecrow somewhere, perhaps in a picture book, and I must have been scared because I started to bawl and thump my feet up and down in the chair. Then this terrifying scarecrow knelt down in front of me and said, "Hush, hush, little cat, don't grieve so. It tears my heart out to see you." She can't really have said that. So unpag-like. But it is what I remember. And she wasn't a pag then, of course. I couldn't spell. That was how it happened. I could read, but no one had taught me how to listen to but no one had taught me to listen to how the words sounded before I wrote them down. I was unhappy. I can't remember missing my mother and father, but I remember that I was frightened, and I was angry with this tall, twig-like person I was supposed to call Granny. So I shouted at her. I threw my mug of milk at the kitchen wall. I spat out my carrots. She took me shopping, and I threw myself on the ground in the middle of Woolworths and screamed and kicked my heels until a circle of people with red faces stood around, looking down at me, muttering. She gave me a bowl of ice cream for tea, and I smashed it until it ran in white streams down the edge of the table, puddling on the floor where the cats licked it. Then I ran up to my room, stomping my feet hard on each stair. I banged my bedroom door open and banged it shut, then opened it so I could slam it again. I wanted to do something to make her sorry. I tore a piece of paper out of my notebook and wrote, "Granny is a pig," and opened the door again and stuck it on the outside with sellotape. Only I didn't write "Granny is a pig." I couldn't spell pig. I wrote "Granny is a pag." P-A-G. I heard her coming. She tapped on the door. Then she made a funny noise. I thought she's seen my notice. She's angry. I wondered what she would do. Would she hurt me? But when I opened the door, she was sitting on the top stair, laughing and laughing. There were tears rolling down her cheeks. The Pag is a doctor. Years and years ago, she worked in a hospital in Poland. Then the war came and the hospital was bombed. She rescued so many patients. She rescued as many patients as she could, but the hospital was destroyed. So she caught the last train out of Poland, the capital of Poland, which is Warsaw, and then the last plane out of somewhere else, and got to England, where she married my grandfather. He'd escaped from Poland too. He was a scientist, and he had a job ready for him in America. But he died very quickly, and suddenly, a month before my mother was born, and the Pag got a job at a London hospital, and bought a house in the suburbs, which is where we live now. She's retired from the hospital, but she still sees some of her old patients privately. She doesn't charge them. She says none of them have any money. Most of the people who come to see her are old, as well as being old patients, and some of them are peculiar. One lady has to have the windows closed and the curtains drawn before she comes into the house, in case someone, she doesn't say who, might look through the windows and see her. There's a man who talks to himself, listening to himself in between, and laughing as if his second self, the self other people can't hear, has said something unexpectedly funny. Another man smiles all the time, but only with his mouth. His eyes look straight ahead, not at you, but through you. This is really unnerving. Although I am a little afraid of the smiling man, I am used to these people. But it is another good reason for not bringing people home. I can just hear some of the girls in my class putting it about that Cat Brooke lives in a, I apologise for this word, madhouse. Girls are much meaner than boys in that sort of way. Luckily, apart from Rosie and Tom, no one else from school lives in this part of town, and Rosie understands about patients because their mother is a doctor too. She has a surgery built on the back of the house, and sometimes she sends the Pag some of her patients who don't need medicine, just someone to talk to. I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to go to theatre either. But if I did take up medicine, I would be a proper doctor. I said to the Pag once, the people who come to see you, they never go away. They just keep on coming. Rose's mother, she hands out medicine and bandages, and her patients get better. I am not very handy with bandages, the Pag said, and I hate the sight of blood. Besides, if I didn't look after my people, no one else would. Most of them are never going to get any better, but sometimes they feel better for a little while. After talking to me, she looked at me, head on one side, blue eyes sharp and bright. What is it really, Cat? She makes me jump when she says things like that. She always knows when there's something I'm not really saying. What I'd been thinking was that most of the patients who went to the surgery next door were normal, sensible people who just happened to be ill at that moment. If the Pag's patients were like Rosie's mother's, instead of grubby and weird like old Flossie, who looks as if she sleeps in a hedge, or plain dotty like Mr. Wilberforce Frisbee, who dances up the driveway, busily conducting an invisible orchestra, the Pag might smarten herself up, look a bit more ordinary and respectable, a little more like a real grandmother. Nobody of her age should have grey hair flying halfway down her back. No one as old as she is should be allowed a motorbike. It's not safe. There should be a law against it. What's that, Liberty? You don't think Kat's worried about her granny being safe on her No, I don't think she is either. I just think she's a bit embarrassed that her granny isn't like other people's grannies. Yeah, you think so too. What's that wonderful Alan Bennett line? Every family has a secret, and the secret is that they're not like other families. I think we're going to hear a bit more about how unusual the Pag is. As we get into the next chapter. We're on chapter 2. It'd been all right in the primary school. I'd known the Pag was a more noticeable sort of person than other parents and grandparents. I knew that. I knew that people looked at her in a special way when she came into the playground to fetch me, but that sometimes they smiled secretly at each other when her back was turned. But I didn't mind because of something my teacher had said. My teacher's name was Hilda, and she was very pretty with straight, shiny hair, so fair it was almost silvery. It fell on both sides of her face when she bent down, and everyone in our class tried to touch it to see what it felt like. I suppose we were all in love with her, the way little kids are often in love with their teacher when they first go to school. Every Monday we had a bring and tell lesson. We had to bring a piece of news to school and tell the rest of the class. I can remember doing this at school, and we generally, though, we call it show, like you guys in the US do. We call it show and tell. I've never heard it called a bring and tell before, but that may be a different school thing. Each week the news had to be about something different. Pets or weather or holidays. One Monday the news was to be about families. The first people to put up their hands told the rest of the class what their mother or their father had done that weekend. Rosie's dad had taken her and Tom to the Science Museum on Saturday and mended the rabbit hutch on Sunday and cooked lunch for everyone while Rosie's mum weeded the garden. I didn't put up my hand, but Hilda looked at me. And in the end, I had to say something. I said, I live with my granny. Several people giggled behind me. Then she said, several people giggled behind me. Hilda looked at them fiercely. Then she said, smiling at me, I know, dear, but your granny is your family. I looked down at my desk and clenched my mouth tight. On Sunday, the Pag and I had been out on the bike for what she called a real old run on the motorway. It was the most exciting thing to be riding pillion, cuddled tight against the Pag's back. The Pag's back, my arms locked round her waist, the big powerful bike roaring and swooping and tilting beneath me, the wind blowing into me and filling my chest. But it wasn't the sort of thing the others had told about, and I didn't want to be different. Hilda said, in a kind voice, "I know your mum and your dad are famous people, Cat. Lots of people have seen them on television. But your granny is a wonderful person in a way you'll better understand when you're older." She'd got it all muddled. She thought I was ashamed because I didn't live with my mother and father. But it didn't matter. She'd said the Pag was wonderful, and I could tell by the way she said famous that she didn't think so much of my mother and father. I understood this perfectly well, even though I was only 6 years old then, but too young to have found the words to explain it. I wriggled in my chair and said, "My granny is a Pag." I said it very softly, because I'd never said it aloud before, and Hilda didn't hear me. She was nodding at a boy who had his hand up at the back of the class. And while this boy went boringly on about talking about how his mum had made a birthday cake for his sister, and his sister had blown out all of 4 candles, I said it under my breath, over and over again, like a charm. "My granny is a Pag." "What's a Pag?" Rosie asked, in the back of the car. It was her mum's turn to collect a starter. "Oh, I don't know," I said, pretending. "It sounds wild," Tom said. He sniggered and jabbed me in the ribs with his elbow and went red in the face. "Like someone who steals little girls or eats nasty boys," I said. "Someone who flies round the town in the night and goes down the chimneys and pulls the arms and legs off the boys and cooks them like sausages." "Oh, shut up," Tom said. I hit him and he hit me back, and Rosie's mum said, "Stop it now, please, all of you." At once Rosie sat up and went, "I didn't do anything." "No, she didn't." I said it wasn't her fault, just me and Tom fighting as usual. "Oh, you too," Rosie's mum said, but she laughed. She didn't mind Tom and me fighting. She never said silly things like, "Boys don't hit girls," or even, "Rosie doesn't fight, why can't you be more like her, Cat?" Tom whispered to me, "If your granny's a Pag, then you must be a Pag too. She's a big Pag and you're a little Pag." And we both rolled about laughing. We were very young then, of course. Rosie and I were 6 and Tom was 7. It was a game between Tom and me for a long time. And a joke at school. When I was 7 and 8, I growled as I ran after the little kids, pretending to be a Pag monster, not to frighten. And if anyone was rude about my Pag grandmother, I thought of the horrible things she might do to them, like knocking them in a cage with savage rats, or putting them down in the sewer. It began to seem a bit silly by the time I was 10, but at least it took people's minds off my mother and father, who by this time were too busy making fools of themselves on the telly with parts in a new soap about an old people's home. The Pag had bought me a television. I hardly ever watched it, except to find out what those two were up to. When we were 11, Rosie and I went to the middle school. It was further away than the primary, a boring journey by car because of the crowded roads, but only 4 stations by tube. Because of the distance, the other children in our class had chosen new schools close to home, but Rosie's mum and the Pag decided that this one would give us a better education and that we were old enough to take the train on our own. Tom had started at this school the year before, and although he made a huge fuss about having to travel with Rosie and me to begin with, he was really glad of our company. There was a long walk to the school from the tube station, up a hilly street, past Rosie and Tom's grandmother's house, and then along a path through a little wood and across a common. This was fine in the mornings when it was light and people were walking their dogs, but going home in the afternoon in the winter, it was a dark, scary walk for a person alone. Trees rustling and spooky shadows moving between them. Of course, Tom never said he was frightened, but when he and Rosie caught flu towards the end of the Christmas term, he told his mother he thought I might be. She told the Pag, and the Pag said she would come to fetch me. She turned up on the bike. Not worth getting the old car out just to stew in a traffic jam, she had said when I left in the morning. I hadn't expected to find her waiting at the gate. Somehow I hadn't expected to find her waiting at the school gate, looking like a person from outer space. For a minute, it was as if this was the first time I'd ever set eyes on her. On this strange creature, half human, half spider, gangly arms and legs in black leather, black helmet and goggles pushed back on her head, on top of what looked like a haystack rather than hair. And of course, she was smoking. I almost sneaked back into school. I could hide in the lavatories until most people had gone. Then no one would know she belonged to me. Somehow I'd have to stop her coming tomorrow. I could say I'd met someone else who walked to the station, or that I didn't mind the dark common. But it was too late. She'd seen me. She waved cheerfully. I managed to wave back, though my arms and legs felt stiff with horror and shame. Except for Rosie and Tom, no one in this new school had ever seen the Pag. I knew they would have to see her eventually, but not like this. Not with the bike, not in her leathers. She said, "You've got a good high colour, young cat. School seems to suit you. Sling your stuff in the saddlebag, put on your helmet, and we'll go for a real old zoom on the way home." I couldn't speak. If I'd been blushing before, I was like a furnace now. I got on the pinion, slammed on my helmet, and screwed up my eyes to pretend I was blind. I didn't want to know who was watching. Some of the people in my class were quite friendly, but they were all sticking to their friends from the last school this first term, and Rosie and I weren't certain yet who was nice and who was nasty. I had the feeling I was going to find out pretty soon, and so as that thought came into my head, I couldn't help peeping. I saw several people from my class standing and staring. Most of them looked surprised, but one boy was grinning in a pleased, evil way. This was Willie. Horrible Willie. And I felt my heart turn cold in my chest and sink like a stone. We're going to leave it there for today, but I wonder what's going to happen with Kat and this boy, Willie. Do you think he's going to be nice about her granny? Do you think Kat doesn't have to be worried? No. You think he's going to be mean, do you, Liberty? Yeah? Oh dear, I hope he's not too mean. We'll have to see, won't we? Thank you so much for listening to all of that. I hope you enjoyed it. I do apologise for some of the language, as they would say on the BBC. It does reflect the attitudes of the time. I'll try and be more mindful of things when I read this in the future. If you're worried about certain parts and feel the need to skip ahead, please do. I wouldn't want to upset anybody. But thank you all so much for watching. Thank you so much for subscribing, for commenting, for sticking with me generally. Your support really makes my day. And Liberty and I will see you soon for another story. Can you wave bye-bye, Liberty? Put your paw up. That's it. Good girl. See you soon, everybody. Thank you again. Cheerio.